Hi, everybody. I am the academic director of GPS STEM, and prior to that, the director of the GPS Biomed program. For a long time, we have been offering programs to pair our trainees with mentors to help them navigate the transition to their future career. This is the first opportunity we've had to offer programming that helps our trainees become better mentors. And this was an idea that was dear to the heart of Harinder, who's been interested in improving mentoring at UCI and throughout the country as part of networks that he's involved in. And it's also something that's been a priority for the Institute for Clinical and Translational Sciences, for which we're represented today by Marguerite Klum. And they came together to work out this program, which is based in part on nationally recognized mentoring programs. And you are the first cohort to take part in this, and we're really glad to see you join this mentoring program. It is an investment of time, but I think what I've noticed over the years is that the special sauce for anybody who wants to become an effective group leader, either in academia or industry, beyond your intellect and your motivation and your work and your luck in getting grants and all that, is your ability to mentor others, to inspire them to do their work as best as they can, help them through the difficult times, and to mentor people depending on their needs, and everybody being slightly different in what they need. And so I've seen very promising faculty sputter because of poor mentoring of their trainees, and others who succeeded in part because they're great mentors. So I think that by taking part in this course, you're going to develop those tools down in the future to be an effective mentor. And I'm really excited that we're doing this. And I thank Harinder and Marguerite and Vince Caiozo and others who've been part of the planning. It's taken a lot of work, and here we are. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Dr. Poon. So let's move forward. And I think before we move forward, I would really like to remind you all, people who've been behind organizing this, and people who will be serving as facilitator for that. So this really, sometimes I feel like it really, as David was saying, takes a village to bring a lot of people together and offer a program like this, which is going to be long-term. So we've been working with ICTS, Dr. Caiozo and Marguerite, for many months. This was even before my daughter was born, and she's 9 months old now. So you can imagine how much of work has gone into it, almost a baby. And it is good to see that this is starting today. So Dr. Caiozo could not be here with us today. He's going through a minor surgery. Otherwise, but he will be there for the second session, and he'll be running a session, and we'll do the breakout activity afterwards. But this is me. I guess some of you know me already, but I'm the one who took over the program from Dr. Fruman after he ran it successfully for 5 years. And then I thought I'll do a good job. And I think I'm doing a good job, but we'll see. I'm the current director of GPS 10, and I'm also as assistant adjunct faculty in the physiology and biophysics at School of Medicine, where I teach the first year medical students for medical physiology. And now I want to turn it over to Marguerite Klum from ICTS. Marguerite.
Thank you so much, Harinder. My name is Marguerite Klum. I am the education and training manager over at the ICTS. I know a lot of you, some of our K&T awardees are on this call. Thank you so much for joining us. Dr. Caiozo, unfortunately couldn't join us today, but anybody that knows him knows that mentoring is a huge passion of his, and he does everything he can to help people succeed. And we're really excited to have him leading the second session. So we're, like Harinder mentioned, we put a lot of work into this, a lot of time and effort. So we really hope you guys get a lot out of it. So I think I'll turn it over to Katie Thompson-Peer.
Hi, y'all. My name is Katie Thompson-Peer. I am a faculty member in the Department of Developmental and Cell Biology. I'm a newish faculty member, so I've only been here at UCI for 2.5 years. So I'm still getting used to this whole idea of being a mentor. I'm certainly not an accomplished expert, but I think mentoring is one of these professional skills that you are just constantly growing and improving upon. And so I look forward to improving upon my own mentoring competencies with you all. I had the opportunity to undergo an entering mentoring training with an organization that was brought to UCI by the Office of Inclusive Excellence back in April, the Center for the Improvement of Mentored Experiences in Research, CIMR, which is the logo on that lower left-hand corner of your slide. They went through and developed this whole curriculum for how to train people to be better mentors. And so I went through the facilitator training to do that. And then I found out that Harinder and Marguerite and ICTS and GPS STEM were already in the planning stages of executing this mentor training. And so I jumped on board and I'm trying to help in any way that I can. So I look forward to working with all of you guys over the next couple of weeks.
Thank you very much, Katie. It's a pleasure to have you. And you will be, Katie will be running some facilitating sessions. She has a lot of experience here because she just went through the training, and this will be a great, fun experience. But before we move forward, I want to acknowledge the organization which Katie mentioned, CIMR, the Center for Improvement of Mentored Experiences and Research. This is our program. What we have built is pretty much adapted and inspired from their programs. They have multiple different formats to it, but we've tried our best to kind of like consolidate and try to provide what works best at UCI, because mentoring varies from, the culture varies from institution to institution, lab to lab, PI to PI. So keeping that in mind, we have tried to adapt the curriculum accordingly. And of course, there'll be a lot of data we will be collecting by the end of it. That'll give us an idea how the mentoring culture is at UCI, and it'll help us identify some of the weak areas which we need to work on together. Before I move forward, I want to just like walk you all through how the whole course is going to look like. So this is where we are, and we've been sending you constant reminders about filling up the pre-survey. This is a very important thing. As I mentioned, we want to gauge what is the culture right now, and we will take you through this training, and we will do again the course completion survey, and we'll see if we've been really able to move the needle of mentoring at UCI with the help of this program. So after today's introduction to mentoring session, Dr. Kayazo will be running the aligning expectations. As you can see here, we have actually taken really case studies from CIMR, which are really tried and tested, and there'll be a lot of discussion around that. And we will put you into breakout rooms. You will be working in your teams all throughout the course. And I think this is really going to help to build peer-to-peer mentoring networks. And we've tried our best to make sure that all of you are not, like when we made the teams, that you're not from the same lab, because I think that sort of will defeat the purpose. So we've tried to like really scramble it so that you get the best experience and learn from each other. Then moving forward, we'll have sessions on assessing, understanding, ethical behavior, equity, inclusion, unconscious bias, independence, and we'll have some speakers coming from outside also for this. And then the last session on career and professional development will be run by Jillian Hayes, who's the Dean of Graduate Division. This is where we'll give you prior instructions on maybe do your IDP and then come to the session. So with that, if there are, oh, I forgot the mid-course survey. This is going to be very important. So please fill out all the surveys we're going to ask you to fill out, because these are very important aspects of program, not only to gauge the mentoring culture, but also for us to know how good or bad of a job we are doing and things we need to improve upon. So with that, I will move forward to our today's session. Today's session is on introduction to mentoring. And our speaker to launch and open the program is Maria Lund Dahlberg. She is the Senior Program Officer and Study Director for the Board of Higher Education and Workforce. She also serves on the Committee on Women in Science, Engineering, and Medicine. She's also on the Roundtable for Black Men and Women in National Academies of Sciences and Engineering. Her current work focuses on the response to adaptation of the higher education to the COVID-19 pandemic. She is also currently working on the impact of COVID-19 pandemic on research careers of women in academic science, engineering, and medicine, and also in equity, diversity, inclusion of post-secondary education. Her work with National Academies spans topics ranging from equity and identity in science through science communication, postdoctoral research experiences, healthcare, and innovation ecosystems. And she came to National Academies through Christine Mirzian Science and Tech Policy Fellowship, got her BA in physics from Vassar College. and got her master's also in physics from Penn State, I believe. Was the study director of the Science of Effective Mentorship in STEM report, which came out a couple of years ago from National Academies. That report really became the trendsetter. And I am still going through it. It's really a bulky one, and I will be sharing that in the Slack channel. Yeah, I think Maria is going to show us the report right now, so you can see how big it is. And so really, this was a consensus study. Yeah, report which, associated online guide that really brings together the evidence. This, for the first time, there's an evidence supporting the effective practices in mentoring relationships. It's also the scholarship on why mentorship is important, particularly for underrepresented students in STEM. And this report gives recommendations for university leaders, mentors, mentees, and professional associations. I think there is like compressed version of it also available, 4 pages. I will add that in the Slack channel if you do not have time to go through the whole thing. That should be useful. But with that, I will give it to Dr. Maria Dahlberg. Maria, thank you very much for coming.
Thanks so much for that fantastic introduction. Yes, my name is Maria Dahlberg. I use she, her pronouns. I want to make sure that I thank UCI as well and Harinder for reaching out to me many months ago to ask me to come and speak in October, and suddenly October is here as part of this mentoring, training, and professional development event. I had the honor of serving as our study director for the Science of Mentorship in STEM. This project was a fantastic opportunity, and we released the report itself about 2 years ago, along with, as Surinder mentioned, a condensed version of an online guide, which we'll get a link to apparently in a Slack channel, but also at the end of my talk. So today I want to focus a little bit about what we mean when we talk about mentorship, how we can work towards developing effective mentoring relationships through intentional conversations, the use of tools, and particularly the role of identity and power dynamics in mentoring relationships. But before we do that, I'm going to try and wake y'all up a little bit with a poll. So Harinder, if you could pop that up, and just think a little bit about what do you think are essential elements or core elements in effective mentoring relationships? You can click as many of these as you would like. So before I go any further, I just want to dispel one common question that gets raised when I speak about this topic a lot. When we first started out in this space in the National Academies about 5 years ago, Dr. Angela Byers-Winston from the University of Wisconsin-Madison, works on the SIMR team, suggested that we do a study on the science of mentorship. And one of her fellow Board on Higher Education and Workforce members tried to correct her, actually, and said, well, wait, you mean mentorship in science? And while it's true, we're the National Academy of Sciences, we do focus on mentorship in the STEM space. We really are talking about the science of mentorship, digging into what we know about how people interact, how they learn, how they support each other, how they grow with each other. And that question, when it was asked, really sparked both myself as well as Dr. Byers-Winston to want to do this study even more. So I want to stress that my presentation today is based on that report. It brings together just a range of disciplinary perspectives, those intellectual and practical activities that help inform a systematic study and provide guidance on the effective behaviors, the mentoring tools, possible structures of mentoring relationships, and absolutely so much more that's in that textbook. So what exactly is mentorship? Let's just get right into it. Pretty much any paper, any textbook, anything that you pick up on the subject is going to start out with a definition. And here's the definition that we put forward in our report. It's a professional working alliance in which the individuals work together over time to support the personal and professional growth, development, and success of the relational partners through the provision of career and psychosocial support. And I'm going to highlight here that this is not just what feels right, but it was developed by a committee of experts based on the literature, based on that social science theories that underpin our understanding of social and developmental relationships. And I'm also going to point to a couple of sort of key elements in here. One, working alliance. This means that these relationships are involving mutually setting goals and working together. It's to the benefit of relational partners, which removes the assumption of a dyadic structure. It's not between two people, and the unidirectionality of the relationship. It doesn't just necessarily flow from person A to person B and not the other way around. And it involves both career and psychosocial support functions. Note that it doesn't say anything about the context or the roles of the people involved. This definition works just as well for the SOCNIS conference that's going to happen in a couple of weeks as it does for a grad student and PI in their physics laboratory. When talking about mentorship, though, we have to get into some nitty-gritty, and it's important that we really acknowledge, say, the role of power dynamics and how they can come into play in these relationships. In a traditional hierarchical dyad, as shown here, the mentee and their career progression and development is often dependent on one person. Especially in research settings, there's a focus on career support functions, like how to write a good grant proposal or who to connect with to advance your career. What challenges do you want to take on next? If you're lucky, it might also involve promotion of work through sponsorship. It often ignores the psychosocial, or what some people call the squishy parts of mentorship. It often assumes trust, which can force interpersonal dynamics that might not actually exist. So I'm going to break those down sort of one at a time. First, any system with a single point of failure is a bad idea. If that person, for whatever reason, has to leave the system, the mentee is going to be left with little to no support or backup. Moreover, it disregards the fact that not all mentors are going to be able or willing to provide all of the types of support functions. We all know folk who are really good at writing grants, or who are really good editors, who know how to listen to you, or who are amazing role models, who can promote your work to others, or who can challenge you personally. But rarely, if ever, are you going to find one person who can do it all. Second, focusing only on those career support functions, but not providing any sort of psychosocial support, it doesn't even meet that definition of mentorship. So what happens if something human happens in the career development? What if your mentee is going to go give their first conference talk, but doesn't know what to wear? They've never been to a conference before. They don't know how to interact. Or what if, as a PI, you don't consider your behavior as role modeling, and you end up setting some inappropriate or just odd norms in your microculture? Third, assuming trust or assigning trust in any way is rarely a good idea. Trust, as you all guessed in that first poll, is a fundamental element of effective mentorship. And it's something that has to be developed through discussions, explicitly laying out expectations, negotiations between mentors and mentees, and above all, mutually agreeing upon the relationship as well as the boundaries of that relationship. Participants in a mentoring relationship should have an expectation of privacy, not just about what is discussed in the relationship, but also about what they are expected to discuss. And the trust that that relationship is a safe space needs to be developed over time. Also, it should be noted that by and large, the onus is going to be on the person who has more power in the relationship to create that space and to earn that trust. Mentorship is also a social relationship. And as such, identity, which we define as the composite of who a person is, the way they think about themselves, the way they are viewed by the world, and the characteristics they use to define themselves, that plays a pivotal role in how mentoring relationships function. Aspects of identity could be considered surface level, that is relatively easy to determine, or deep level, requiring more time and more engagement to determine. It's pretty important, though, to remember that some aspects of identity are not necessarily as readily apparent as they might seem. Great example of that is somebody's gender identity. Specific dimensions of identity, such as somebody's science identity, their how much they identify as a scientist professionally or internally, or their cultural identities, have been empirically linked to both their academic and career development, as well as their experiences of mentoring relationships in STEM. Students with identities that are not well represented in STEM can feel othered or isolated, and they often talk about the simultaneous invisibility and hypervisibility problem. In many STEM contexts, mentees might feel the need to check part of themselves at the door, or may experience what we call identity interference, where the performance or the presentation of one of their identities is literally interfering with the performance or presentation of another identity, say somebody's science identity with a cultural identity. Identity interference can result in lower academic performance, depression, and even reduced psychological well-being. So how can we move from these assumption-filled and identity-ignoring, power-skewed hierarchical dyads that we sort of assume are going to be how mentorship plays out, to more effective, inclusive, and supportive mentorship? To engage in the most effective mentoring relationships, everybody from university leaders, department chairs, to program directors, mentors, mentees, everybody in the system needs to take action and needs to use the tools and resources that are available to them. In the report, we lay out several recommendations, 7 of which really are intended to help encourage a shift away from the ad hoc culture of mentorship towards one of intentional, inclusive mentoring relationships, the top line of which are all laid out here. But practically, it's also important to recognize that there are some key concepts and ideas that are central to effective mentoring. For example, early on in research on mentorship, it was recognized that mentoring relationships, like most relationships, occur in stages. Some of those stages, like initiation and cultivation, may seem relatively self-apparent. Initiations that first time you get to know each other, time to set expectations, time to develop trust. It's when you determine whether this relationship is even going to be the right fit, or time to figure out and imagine what is success going to look like for you two, for the people involved. Cultivation is when you get that work done, when trust deepens and the initial goals and expectations might need to be revisited. It's when the most career and psychosocial support is provided and received. Other stages might seem a little bit odd, right? Separation, redefinition, they seem even counter to what we understand as being true mentorship. But separation is not necessarily pulling apart. You could think of it as mentees gaining their independence, reaching a level of skill development that they no longer require the same type of mentorship they did before. It requires a whole lot of self-reflection and a lot of communication. Redefinition, as the name implies, involves changing the nature of the relationship itself. With shifting needs, with different goals, maybe your interests are changing, your priorities are changing, of both the mentors and the mentees, the relationship is going to shift as well. Maybe it's going to be a friendship. Maybe people become colleagues. Maybe the relationship ends. That's okay. To develop a complete and effective mentoring relationship, though, all of the stages need to be considered. The report highlights several of the key elements in the relationship as well. And many of them, frankly, probably seem pretty obvious when you say them out loud, but you have to approach them with intentionality. For example, and again, this one's come up a lot, and y'all are pretty good at it probably, or at least you already recognized it, the development of trust. It forms over time, it forms through mutual processes in response to the needs and goals of all of the people involved in the relationship. There may be cases where it's more likely to have trust form more easily. Often these are associated with relationships where there are surface level similarities, at least initially. But it can also be built when there are deep connections, deep level similarities, and form over time with intentionality. Self-reflection on the part of both the mentors and the mentees can be really hard to do, or to do critically, but it is necessary and it is essential to do throughout all of the stages of mentorship. Setting explicit expectations and boundaries, preferably in writing and at the beginning of the relationship in that initiation stage, is particularly important so that those involved in the relationship can revisit and revise them as necessary as the relationship continues to grow and shift. And participation in mentorship education, like you're doing today and in the course of this series, is fantastic because, and I cannot stress this enough, mentorship is a learned skill. Perhaps one of the strongest findings in the entirety of our report is on the effectiveness of mentorship education programs like those from Simmer and those you're going through today. We also found, though, that they are not as widely utilized as they could be. And this is a huge opportunity for improvement of mentorship across the STEM fields. Especially for students with identities that are not well represented in STEM, culturally responsive mentorship can help increase feelings of inclusion. Culturally responsive mentorship is another set of skills that mentors can and should learn, regardless of their race or gender. As Angela Byers Winston likes to say, nobody is off the hook here. It may help students navigate invalidating experiences in academia, affirm their belonging in STEM, reinforce their beliefs in their own abilities to become successful in STEM careers. By engaging and affirming their own cultural identities along with their STEM identities, mentees are less likely to feel that need to check themselves at the door. They're less likely to experience identity interference. In situations where culturally responsive mentorship may not be available, which is unfortunately often the case, online affinity groups or conferences have been shown to show support. That definition of mentorship that I put up in the beginning didn't say anything about the structure of mentoring that was involved. And the committee did not limit it to a traditional dyadic structure. Dyads are going to still play a major role in mentorship, and many mentoring relationships are going to be considered like as dyads. Triads, though, simplest non-dyadic structure. Could be 2 mentors and 1 mentee. Could be 2 mentees and 1 mentor. They can be closed with 2 dyads joining together, or sorry, that's open. Open is 2 dyads joining together, or closed with connections between all 3 parties. Collective or group mentoring involves multiple mentors, multiple mentees, connections, and between connections among them. This type of mentorship could involve individuals from different levels of experience, as shown here, or it could occur between groups of peers and near peers. Within your own mentoring relationships as well, you can always use tools to help yourself out. Tools like IDPs, which I think you're going to get to later in this course, mentorship compacts or agreements, mentoring maps, mentoring plans. All of these can help your self-reflection, your boundary and expectation settings, and identifying your mentoring needs. Just briefly, so everybody's on the same page, IDPs help you explicitly lay out your own personal goals and can help guide conversation with your mentors. Compacts or agreements are developed between members of mentoring relationships and should lay out, again, explicitly and in writing, the expectations for every member of the working alliance. Mentoring plans are used to outline the approaches of mentors to their intended mentoring relationships. And mentoring maps help mentees identify what types of mentorship they might need and who can help them achieve these roles and supply this information. The image here is of a mentoring map that includes both mentors, mentoring nodes, different kinds of resources as well. As your mentoring relationships develop, you can always come back to these tools that you might have set up initially and see if everything is on track. That's why it's useful to have them written down. You can determine what needs to be altered or adjusted to fit how your relationship has changed. And remember, can't stress this enough, it's going to change, and that's okay. So again, let's try another poll. What tools have you used in your own mentoring relationships? Poll, please.
Is the poll up? It says it's already been started. Give me 1 second, let me restart it. Somehow I'm not able to do it from my end. Can you try from your end, Maria?
Let's try there. Oh, it's not working.
Sorry about that. This
It's
has
okay.
never happened to me before.
Well,
But you want people to write in the chat?
you can write in the chat if you'd like, but it was more just to have you guys think about what you've used. So we can talk about that later if you'd like. And finally, the last thing I want to bring up is to remember and recall that context of your mentoring relationship is also important. I'm guessing that a lot of you guys are within research contexts and research environments. And I think it's important to think about the role of the research advisor in respect to mentorship. Research advisors are often conflated with that of a mentor. And in many cases, this is a perfectly reasonable assumption. Research mentoring relationships often sit in this sort of weird space between very formalized mentoring relationships with well-defined supervisory and evaluative functions. Maybe they've even been assigned to people, or informal mentorship, which has more mutual interest, sort of ad hoc development. You found each other and everything sort of sparked and it worked out well. However, mentees who choose their research advisor often do so with relatively scant information on who they're getting into these relationships with. And the initiation stage that can be so critical for mentorship might not even occur. It is possible that research relationships that don't begin as mentorships can build that trust and the responsiveness that is needed to be really effective mentoring. But I think it's important to remember, not all research advisors are going to be mentors. And again, that's okay. But just be clear about what kind of relationship it is. So there are so many more suggestions and a lot more research that's laid out in the full report or in the online guide. I've got a lot of URLs here. I can provide them to Hardinder and we can get them to you in the chat or in Slack. I'm also going to be really remiss if I didn't mention that we actually have made a podcast about this report. We've got season 1 is already out. And we're working on season 2 right now with some great guests who are sharing their stories about mentorship. The second season is featuring stories about current postdocs and students, and it's really fantastic. So thanks again for having me here, for listening to me, for letting me share some of the findings. And I'm happy to take questions if you have them. Here's my contact information again. And all right.
All right.
I've got it.
Thank you very much, Maria. And now we are open to questions. Please feel free to either add them in the chat, but otherwise I wanted to reiterate the fact that this is a safe space. Feel free to unmute yourself and directly ask a question.
I actually need to kind of start my first mentee kind of a relationship. And, you know, one of the things that I can kind of sense is that, you know, he's very ready to move on to like the next phase of like, you know, independence and such. So how do you kind of get a temperature gauge from them, whether it's verbally from your mentee or whether it's kind of just by how they're acting of when they're ready to move to kind of the next phase of like that mentee mentor relationship?
How would you do it?
I guess I've kind of started off by like talking with him about how he's feeling and how, you know, how comfortable he is with the work that he's doing and kind of trying to get a temperature gauge more so from him in his own words about that. But how do you go about it without necessarily also having to, you know, straight up ask them, I guess? Are there any other cues, I guess, is my main question.
Well, so I think it will depend a lot about the relationship that you have with this individual and how you normally communicate with them. My personal preference, though, is to ask, be explicit. If there seems to be the time that, you know, you need to figure out what's the next step, it doesn't have to be that you're going to kick them out the door, right? But you can say, hey, I think we've moved into a different phase of what we're engaging with. What do you think we need to be doing next? What were your new goals? You know, I think we've accomplished what we set out to do. How should we move forward? What would you like to have next on your plate? And it can be a way for you to sort of redefine, to reinitiate that relationship.
I have a question. So I am a big fan of stealth mentoring, or when I like have somebody else who I think that they are a mentor to me, but maybe they don't know, right? Because I feel like there's so much pressure. If you go and ask and you say, will you be my mentor? And then that implies this huge amount of time. People may be resistant or anxious about agreeing to that if they don't know what they're agreeing to. But I much prefer to go and ask people like specific questions about specific topics, which is kind of what I'm framing as stealth mentoring. But that seems to really fly in the face of the advice that you had, which was to explicitly and in a written form set out the rules of the mentoring relationship. So was there anything in the report about informal or mentoring relationships, or how to kind of ease into these things without kind of like dropping the bomb at the beginning to say like, we're going to have this formal mentoring relationship and asking somebody to sign a contract with you?
Yeah, so again, I think that, you know, what I presented here was probably a little bit more to if you're going to have long-term formalized goal-centered relationships. And I think that there is a great benefit to having informal back and forth. I think you have to be very clear, though, about your expectations for relationships where the other individual may not know that they're part of that relationship in the same way. So be aware that, you know, if you ask somebody and you've been getting great advice from them for a while and you're sort of considering them a mentor, but they don't think about that relationship in the same way, and suddenly one day that relationship might not be there for you. And you can't be upset about that because you never gave them the expectation that that was part of how you were interacting. So that's a risk that you're taking for that. And that can be a really hard thing to go through, to suddenly not have that there anymore. But I think it's, you know, it can be a really difficult ask sometimes to put yourself out there. It's really vulnerable to ask somebody to be your mentor. That's a really hard question. So I understand it. I do it too. I'll admit that. There are people who I'm like, I'll just ask that person for that question and piece of advice. They gave me a really good answer last time. But I have to recognize that they probably don't see me in the same way that or see our relationship in the same way that I see theirs.
Okay, thanks.
It also doesn't stop it from becoming that in the future.
That's true, like growing into one of those more formalized relationships.
And I have to be clear, right? Like, it doesn't have to be written down. It doesn't have to be explicit and formal in the same way. You have to be clear about when, right? Like, you can be like, hey, I really enjoy us having coffee all the time and I think of you as a mentor. Can we keep doing that? Can you be my mentor? That could be enough. It doesn't have to be like a Google Doc that you have in place. That's maybe better for grad students.
Kind of on the topic of the triad mentor relationship. For example, when you have two mentors and a mentee, for example, with collaborations, and the nature of collaborations sometimes don't always have a specific set and end date. And so it seems to be sometimes a moving target. And in addition, you may not be in as a mentor, you may not be in every single conversation with the mentee and mentor in this triad relationship. So you may not know the full range of, for example, expectations. So I was just wondering if you could, put out some tips or advice on that type of relationship.
So there's some interesting research in the area of looking at triadic mentoring relationships. Erin Dolan did some great work in this space, looking primarily at ones that have sort of 3 different levels of hierarchy in some sense, where there's like a PI and a postdoc and a grad student in some forms of triads. But I think there are additional lessons that can be learned in this space as well from people, even if it's like 2 PIs and a student or similar. And one of the main takeaways from a lot of her research ended up being that closed triads, or at least where there is communication between all of the members of the triad, tend to work a lot better than open triads because of the miscommunication, because of the ways that sometimes things get lost. If you get like lack of direction or misdirection, contrary direction, that's what I'm trying to say, from different members pulling you in different directions, it can get really confusing. And so I think that even if you don't have like a fixed end date, most relationships don't have a fixed end date, even if they eventually end, that it can be really useful to have something where everybody knows they're involved, even if they're not present at every meeting. They know sort of what is going on and what's happening. The 2 PIs can get together and talk about what's happening. Each individual dyadic pair could get together and talk. You just have to be pretty open about what's happening and have a lot of that trust building come into play.
Thanks.
I hope that actually answered your question and I didn't just go off on a ramble.
No, that was pretty good. I think.
All right. Are there any more questions?
I was wondering about the time it takes from moving a relationship between a mentor and mentee from advising to a advisee advisor relationship to mentor-mentee relationship, and the time it takes to build the trust. So are there some tools mentees can use or mentors can use which facilitate trust building and a little more clarity on how the relationship evolves from advisor-advisee to mentor-mentee phase?
Yeah, so I mean, that one building trust is a hard one, right? So particularly if you're like sort of thrown together and you didn't necessarily choose this person, they're either like assigned to your lab or you got, you know, the rotation put you in that person's laboratory, or like they're the only PI that works on the subject that you want to work on, whatever it ends up being, right? You sort of put into this position where suddenly you're working with somebody. There are many different ways that you can try and that can help you build rapport and help you build trust. And a lot of them have to do with showing that you are willing to be patient, be vulnerable, be trustworthy, and let, you know, creating a space for other people to share, but not expecting it, right? You can't pull people into this. You have to let them sort of self-guide into it. And when they do share, don't violate that, right? Like that's something that's pretty sacred, pretty awesome that somebody has shared with you. And build that slowly over time. And in addition to that, right, you can do the things on the flip side of being a good sponsor, being a good supporter for them, showing them that, right, if they've come to you with an idea, I'm assuming in this case that I'm speaking to a PI and the grad student is coming to you, just FYI. Tell me if I should flip this around. But if a grad student comes to you and, right, like they've done some really awesome work, you can promote that by helping them submit a poster to a conference, or telling, you know, when you give a conference talk and it's based on their work, tell everybody that it's based on your grad students' work. Give them first authorships, you know, promote them as the intellectual contributor in this. So talk them up to your colleagues so your colleagues know who they are. Do all of that sort of sponsorship side of things as well, without betraying any of the trust that you've gotten. And you can start building that up. But it takes time, particularly if there's not a sort of natural connection there initially.
Go ahead. You had a question.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so I'm in particular interested in peer mentoring, especially in like graduate programs. It might be like a more senior graduate student to a more junior one, and in particular in the potential of like group mentoring to help build out people's networks and support systems and connect people, sort of connect junior grad students with each other. But one thing I wonder about, and one challenge I see coming up in that is the competition that junior grad students can feel with each other, and encouraging them to be vulnerable in that space of group mentoring to share challenges they're running into. And I'm wondering if you had any advice or strategies for how someone in the mentor position can perhaps encourage those mentees to feel safe and secure in that kind of space.
To try and discourage competition between your mentees? Or
yes, discourage. Sorry if I flipped the wrong word there. Definitely discouraging competition. Yeah.
So one, I think creating opportunities where you're having your mentees teach each other is useful. So you're showing that everybody is providing value is useful. Making sure that there is a number of different opportunities to be recognized, I think, is another one. If there's a limited number of opportunities, or if you highlight the scarcity of opportunities, then that becomes, again, a more and more of a problem where people are going to be fighting for those opportunities. And making sure that, you know, collaboration becomes the thing that becomes awarded or rewarded, rather than the sort of single brilliance mindset. I think there's some really great research in terms of even just outside of the mentorship space, in terms of trying to, create inclusive, balanced workplaces that can be really useful to try and focus on how do you, make sure that work-life balance becomes a more important idea, and listen to all of the members of your lab, regardless of where they are on their trajectory so far.
There's a question in the chat, and I think Charlie really stole my question. I thought I was going to pose a hypothetical situation which doesn't exist, but seems like it does exist. And she asked a question. She wants to know if there isn't a natural connection or rapport between mentor and mentee. Is that still a good mentoring relationship, or should you go and look out for advice? Would you advise changing mentors in that situation?
I don't think it all needs to come down to being natural or not. I think you can get a lot out of having really good career support if you are recognizing, right? There are people who are going to be much better at giving career support in mentoring relationships if they recognize that while they're doing it, here are the things that I'm giving in the psychosupport functions. And that still can be a really valuable and engaging relationship to have. I think as a mentee, if you're recognizing this person is providing these aspects of what I need from my mentorship, right? They're going to be the person who I go to bounce my experimental ideas off of and to give really rough but necessary grant edits, or my writing edits on. Man, they just tear my writing to shreds, but it's so worth it in the end. And they also, help me figure out who I should connect to at conferences. That's still a mentoring relationship because it's got aspects of career support and psychosocial support, but they're not, we don't chum it up. We're not going to the coffee shop, or we're not having donuts in the morning. It's just that never connected. That's fine. But maybe as a mentee, you want that as well. You can have that just with someone else. Find a different person who is your coffee and donuts mentor. And then you can have that support there as well, where maybe when the person who redlines your entire manuscript, you go and talk to them and you're like, oh my God, I got another totally redlined, horrible. Oh, I can't believe that happened. And then they say to you, here, have another donut. Remember, it makes your writing better. And that's their role. And that's a great mentor to have. And you move forward with that. And now you've got 2 points of support. You probably need a couple more, because that's triangles are better. Just in general, they're more stable as a support structure. By the way, I was a physicist.
Great.
I don't know if that actually answered the question, but you don't need everything from one person.
I would argue that you're never going to get everything from one person. That's a false ideal of mentoring that just doesn't exist, right? Yes. There's no Yoda who's going to train you in everything and meet all of your needs. And so that's not the goal. And so if your mentoring relationship falls short of that, that's fine, because you look for those needs in other people.
I will note though that there are times when you're going to want to change, right? There are going to be situations where the person is negatively impacting you enough that maybe you don't want to be there anymore. Maybe there are definitely times when it's a seriously negative or toxic environment and you need to leave. And that's something you need to be able to recognize. But there are also times when this is just not going to be a beneficial developmental relationship at all. And then you need to end that relationship. And that happens sometimes. Sometimes you can still have it be an advisory relationship. You could still have it be a supervisory relationship. You could still work in that lab, but it's no longer any form of mentorship. You get your mentorship someplace else.
I think that it's probably like somehow it is coming up in one of the questions, but one big confusion a lot of times. I would just like to say it because I struggle with that that differentiation. There's a big difference between between an advisor and a mentor. It's not necessary that your advisor is going to be a mentor and vice versa. So based on that, there's a question similar to what Katie had asked earlier. Do you have advice for how to start a formal mentoring relationship with someone who is not assigned to you as such in a traditional PI student pairs?
So I would start by trying to figure out what you're looking for. And a great tool for this is a mentoring map. Brenda Montgomery has great resource on this that really thinks about what kinds of mentorship do you have? What kinds of mentorship are you lacking? And then think about who might be able to provide that skill development, that mechanism of support, something that you are looking for. And this could be anything from spiritual guidance to grant writing to leadership development so that you can become an administrator. I don't know what you're looking for, but think about what you want mentorship in. What space are you looking for? And if you've got people who you might think fit into that, reach out to them. If you don't, but you know somebody who's like, I want to be like that person, LinkedIn stalk them. I don't know, figure out like what kind of role is people, who are in the roles that you would like to be, and then do some informational interviews, see if there's a click there, and then make an ask. Do that. Or ask your current mentors if they have suggestions for people who might fill the various roles that you're looking for. Occasionally, there's also some really like, we used to go to conferences in person, now we go to conferences on Zoom, but you can do stuff like that. Connect with somebody in a Zoom chat, connect with somebody in a hallway if they exist anymore. And connect with people on Twitter. I've heard some great relationships have built on Twitter in mentoring spaces. There are entire mentoring hashtags that built up, right? Particularly over the past year or so, there's been some really great mentoring networks that are developing. So depending on what you're looking for is going to depend on how you make an approach to people. And then it is going to be an ask. You're going to have to figure out how to ask that question.